All right, and welcome to the Mavericast. I am Andrew, and we have a huge topic today. We assembled the best cast, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves individually. Go right ahead, whoever wants to start.
Hi, I'm Gina. I am a linguistics and psychology major. I'm a junior here at Pitt. I want to go to grad school here, and I'm excited to be on.
I'm Marlo. I am the editor-in-chief of the Pitt Maverick. I am a junior political science and English reading major. I think that's about it for me.
I'm Ben Shepard. I'm back on the Pitt Maverick. It's a pleasure to be making my glorious return. I'm a junior history and political science major, and I'm planning on going to law school.
And joining us via Skype is former social media director of the Pitt Maverick, Jordan Drisler. Jordan, please go ahead and give an introduction.
Hi everyone. My name is Jordan, and I just graduated this past December, and I am now in North Carolina with a full-time mechanical engineering job, which I love. So far so good. And it's good to be on the Mavericast. It's my first time joining you guys, so excited to be here.
Thank you for being on. And so for Jordan and Gina, a question we always ask people who are on for their first time, what political figure do you most align with?
Rand Paul, Libertarian hero.
All right, Jordan?
Oh, mine's going to be a little bit longer of an answer because I've been thinking about it all day. And as far as a person that I kind of ideologically align with, I would say Frank Meyer. He was a journalist in the 60s. And he was the one who coined the term fusionism, which is kind of like conservatarianism now, only it was more of an emphasis on traditional conservative values. But as of current political figures, I would probably say either Marco Rubio or Ben Sasse.
Great. So to state the date of recording, today is Thursday, February 16th. And just before we get started, go ahead and follow us on all forms of social media, Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud. You can get in touch with us with carrier pigeons, smoke signals as well. So, and just to move on, today our big topic that we promised is going to be feminism, both from a conservative perspective and a libertarian perspective. And to give a quick backstory of how we kind of arrived here, I always like to ask for topics, whether it be from within the newspaper, from outside of it, in comments. And this was suggested to me earlier this week, and I think it's a great place for us to go.
Yeah, I feel like feminism has been something that it has been especially popular in the news cycle lately, whether it's from, kind of the Trump statements that he made or things that were uncovered about, a video taken of him 11 years ago saying things, or the Women's March on Washington. And I feel like there hasn't been really a discussion about feminism from the libertarian conservative perspectives. And I feel like any discussion that has been made about it from those perspectives has been on, it hasn't been very insightful. It's been, like Twitter and Facebook clashes, and it hasn't really actually been a discourse between people who aren't, on the left side of the spectrum. So I think it's important to discuss it because I think feminism should be something that appeals to everyone. It's just a matter of what that definition is. So I'm hoping that through this discourse with people from kind of different perspectives of feminism, we can strike kind of, whether it's an agreement or not, I think if we can kind of see where we're coming from as to how we define our own version of feminism, I think that's very important to do.
And I'm glad Marlo mentioned the definition, because another reason why I was so interested in doing this podcast this week, I was texting a friend the other day, and she asked me, would you call yourself a feminist? And I couldn't come up with an answer, because I couldn't decide and I thought about it for probably 30 minutes, and I couldn't come up with an answer, because the definition I've seen being taken so many different ways.
Yeah, definitely.
And I wasn't sure how to respond.
Definitely. I feel the same way, and I'm someone who, I've written for feminist publications before, and I still don't know when someone asks me, are you a feminist? I generally don't know how to respond, because, I am someone who considers feminism something that is pertinent even in 2016, or 2017 rather now. But whenever someone asks me, especially on college campus, when they ask me, do you consider yourself a feminist, I kind of hesitate to answer that question. So I understand when someone, especially when men say that they're not feminists, or even some women who say they're not feminists, and people might be startled to, think, oh wow, like this person's a misogynist or sexist. No, I mean, there are genuine concerns that come with adopting that as a label. Whenever you have people like some of the characters that were at the Women's March, like Madonna, for example, why would you want to be associated with that label?
So, just I want to give everyone else a chance. Say, why you decided to come on today, and sort of your own backstory as well.
Yeah, well, I agree a lot with what Marlo said. I also took Intro to Feminist Theory last semester, so I'm basically an expert. But yeah, it's weird coming from a more. I'm fairly socially liberal, but coming from a more like fiscally conservative position. As a feminist, you get backlash from all sides because you have a lot of conservatives that say like feminism is just hating men, it's too liberal for them, but then you have liberals and socialists who don't think you can be a feminist if you're conservative. I've heard people that say like you can't be socially liberal and economically conservative because like social liberalism comes with socialism to make sure that everyone's equal, and I don't think that's true. I don't think it's necessary to have socialism to live in a feminist society. I think it's much more of a cultural than a political thing. So that's where I'm coming from.
Ben, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, of course. So the way I look at feminism is I view it as sort of a way that women feel empowered to be women. Because I think that throughout history, women have been oppressed. But it's not the way that I think a lot of feminists may think. I see the state as being the example of oppressing women. Whether it's being examples like, one example I can say is, I believe in the 19th century, you weren't allowed to get a divorce in South Carolina as a woman. Until 1966 in New York, you had to prove adultery to get a divorce in New York. So you had these like policies that held women back, but these were policies instituted by the state, specifically in the U.S. Now, the U.S. isn't the only culprit. You had stuff like England would do that to hold women back. But my opinion is more that women should really feel empowered to be women, and that it's them that control their rights, not the state, and the state doesn't need to give them rights. Well, the state does need to make sure they obviously protect their rights. However, some of the policies, such as equal pay, have unintended consequences that would set women back. And I think I would close with this point is I know quite a few women, and I can tell you one thing, a lot of women can definitely they sure can kick butt, for lack of a better word. So, but I think it can be a good thing, feminism.
And before I go on to Jordan, I just want to say this is the most diversity that we've ever had on the Mavericast, so that is certainly welcome. So Jordan, go right ahead.
Yeah, sure. I'm probably, out of all the people on the podcast, I'm probably willing to say that I'm probably the one who rejects probably the feminist label the most. I think that's probably fair to say. I guess I would be maybe the most anti-feminist in the modern sense of the word, which I kind of want to talk about a little bit later. So the perspective that I'm really coming at this is as a woman who has been very successful in a very much male-dominated field, and just kind of juxtapose my success by all like the story you hear kind of from the modern feminist camp of the things that supposedly society tells women that they can't do. And I'd like to say that I think a lot of that narrative is simply just coming from that movement instead of really being based in a reality. But I think what feminism has really turned into, and I think this is like the big point, because as soon as you say something about being against feminism, so much of the default reaction is to go back to the definition as it was at the turn of the century or something like that, where we're fighting for equality. And obviously that's noble, we should all do that. The issue is that modern day feminism has become such an ideology with this big laundry list of things that you have to agree with, and it's very Puritan in the sense that if you disagree with one thing on that list, they are very willing to ostracize you for that. And so that's what really holds me back from even wanting to label myself as a feminist, because so many things come along with that now. And I'm not one of those people that think, I don't think I've ever really accused the feminist movement of being like, oh, man-hating. I think that's a really lazy kind of insult that a lot of people go to. But I think the biggest reason I'm against it isn't for how they treat men, but for how they treat women who choose not to put that label on themselves.
Great. So I think I like a lot of what you said, and I think we can get into that. We can get into that more later. So a term that I heard from everybody was definition, and I think that's something important. So what does the term feminism mean to each of you individually?
Social, political, and economic equality for all genders.
Empowering women to do what they want, and I think that it should that is very broad, but I think that's how it should be.
Empowerment of women to be proud to be women.
Okay. And Jordan?
I would say it's embracing femininity for like a positive and in a positive way, leading towards empowerment.
And so one thing that Jordan mentioned was sort of a disconnect between feminists and some other women, and I think it's important to say that since both of you are, Gina and Marlo, you're both pro-life feminists, do you feel that there is this disconnect, and how could you describe it?
Well, I think we saw it perfectly at the Women's March, where the organizers and I think it was I don't think it was Gloria Steinem. It was what's her name? I forget what her name was, but they basically said that if you are not pro-choice, then you are not a feminist. It was point blank, like that's exactly what they said. And it's amazing to me that it wasn't just this one person that is, a major feminist. I keep forgetting her name, but it was the organized, like the organizational structure.
Jessica Valenti had been tweeting about that.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I forget what the name was, but it was the people who organized the Women's March on Washington, which is supposed to be this, this coalition of women and from different parts of the country coming against, sexism, against, possible inequality, but they are able to so unabashedly make this division between pro-choice and pro-life women, which is really insulting, for one, because they champion a woman's right to choose, but they don't champion a woman's right to choose her ideology, her, God forbid she has intellectual endeavors that veer from what she's taught in academia, or, what she may attain from listening to other feminists or from, more liberal literature. So I think that that's really a disconnect, and I think it's extremely, I think it's a poison pill for the entire movement.
Yeah, I completely agree. The really interesting thing is that there were actually like 3 or 4 pro-life organizations on the sponsor list originally. New Wave Feminist, and then there were one which is and then there were none, sorry, which is like an organization for ex-abortion workers. And then there was a bunch of backlash on Twitter once people found out that they were pro-life organizations, so they just cut them without even telling the leaders of those organizations. And look, I am very passionately pro-life, but I can understand the pro-choice perspective. What frustrates me is that pro-choice feminists are not willing to listen to pro-life feminists most of the time, and a lot of our goals are the same, if, like, excluding abortion, of course. Most pro-life feminists I know want women to be able to carry their babies, to have support if they want to carry their babies, to have support if they want to give them up for adoption, and pro-choice feminists would agree, especially if a woman wants to keep her baby, that we need support for that. And I think that what we should be focusing on is working together to give women those supports rather than being so divided over abortion.
And have either of you, and Jordan included, have you ever felt that because you're in the conservative libertarian spectrum, that people have expected you to have a different point of view or a different position simply because you're a woman?
Oh, absolutely. I can't even tell you guys how many experiences I've had where I start a conversation with someone and I tell them right off the bat that obviously they know I'm a woman, but I tell people I'm Arab, and they're like, wow, this girl's really gonna, she's gonna be all these things I expect her to be. She's gonna be anti-Trump, she's gonna be liberal as hell. And then they find out I'm like this, gun-toting, pro-life, traditional conservative, and they're like, oh, so she's like she's a self-hating Arab, and she probably hates women. And it's really insulting. So I think that it really is hilarious to me that this is what it's come to. And I mean, I've one of the members of the Fourth Wave, which is Pitt's feminist publication, has been very welcoming toward me and has heard me out about this, because it, like I said, it's very insulting that women who I feel like I should have some sort of companionship with are so quick to denounce me for being for not falling into that mold they assign me to. But I mean, I'm sure Gina, you can probably attest to this, and Jordan especially, being in a male-dominated field. I'm sure. Yeah.
I'd like Jordan to go, and then I want to ask the Libertarians.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe like in a specific conversation, like someone maybe with like about a specific issue. But I just remember one situation, and it was this past fall, and we were door knocking, and I was door knocking for Pat Toomey, but some of the other people we were with were there for Trump. I did not support him. I didn't feel comfortable handing out literature for him, so I was just there for the senatorial race. But on our way back to the car, this woman drove past us and pulled over, slowed down, rolled down her window. We had left the literature on her porch, and she kind of, threw it back at us, and I was like, okay, very polite. She starts, yelling about all the things that Trump had said about women. And obviously she didn't know that I wasn't there for him, but her whole, we didn't say anything back to her. At that point, it's when someone's yelling at you, you're not going to win them over or whatnot. But I remember her looking at me specifically, because I was the only woman in the group, and she just says, I mean, you're a woman. And that was her whole argument. Like, how could I think something? She had no idea what I thought. She had no idea my views on anything. We hadn't had any type of conversation. But her whole argument was why I should be voting a certain way was because of my gender. And that was when I think I really had firsthand experience with the liberal groupthink. That she looked at me as not an individual, not as an autonomous human being who is capable of independent thought, but just as my gender. And that was so insulting. So.
And I want to get back.
But as far as being a woman in a male-dominated field, I think it is no big deal, and I actually really enjoy it. It's the idea that women have it difficult in a field such as engineering is absolutely false. And in a way, actually, I think we have it a lot easier, because we do end up kind of being the minority quota in the situation. Whether that's fair or not, it is absolutely true that you can have a lower GPA and get a job. You can kind of you kind of get pushed through in a way. I mean, that wasn't my situation, but the idea that we're somehow discouraging women from going into STEM fields is simply not true. And that's just the one thing I wanted to bring up, because we have special college groups specifically dedicated to outreach to high school girls for engineering. We don't really do that for high school students in general, but specifically for women. And I think a lot of the talk about women not going into this field is coming from people who have no experience in it. So that's kind of my one beef about that.
I want to ask the Libertarians, I want to give Gina and Ben same question. Do you feel that, because, and we can take this sort of from the same perspective of people expecting a certain political belief out of women, but also about the way that the left will play identity politics, because I think it affects you guys just as much as it affects conservatives.
Yeah, I would agree that I think one issue I have with the current feminist movement is it's definitely really left-wing, and it relies on governments to solve a lot of the problems, versus a lot of the issues we have are more cultural issues. Like, if you look at, there's been studies done that show, they usually will cite that women, one of the reasons why women tend to be paid a little bit less than men, and there's less women in CEO positions, is not necessarily, there may be some overt sexism that exists, but it's not extreme. One reason is women end up spending, they don't spend as much time networking, when they have these guaranteed maternity leaves when the countries that guarantee maternity leave, women end up having less time to develop networking connections or get experience, so that ends up hurting women's careers. And another example I would say is there's one issue that I really take offense with. sure we have to bring him. But the equal pay legislation, which I think is just a nightmare to legislate, I don't necessarily see as an issue, because if me and Gina both apply for a job at, God forbid, McDonald's right now, we would be all else equal, even though Gina is a barista, I'm not. I'm just a bagger. So we would probably be paid the same thing. That being said, if you end up if you end up factoring in, let's say you end up saying women get paid $9, I think that's just going to be a regulatory mess that you're going to end up having to deal with. And it's also going to incentivize employers not to hire women, which is definitely what we don't want to happen at all. I think the other thing, too, is to keep in mind is that, in general, we just want to make sure that, and there are some fields that there's not as many women into. I think it's more of a cultural thing, and there's ways that the free market can help remedy that, such as engineering. I don't know if there's any Shark Tank fans that listen to the podcast or listening to me right now.
Mark Cuban is a loser.
I may have to just stop there. But there was this really interesting product that was pitched. I believe there were these engineers named Alice Brooks and Bettina Chen, and they did this one thing where it was sort of like a Barbie, but it was almost like a Lego Barbie, and it was more about the product was called Ruminate, and was all about sort of bridging the gap early on in childhood from STEM fields. And Mark Cuban, who has daughters, said he thought it was a great idea and invested. I think Apple ended up picking both of them up. So there's ways we can solve this problem from free markets and not necessarily government that has been oppressing women.
Can I jump here just really quick on the equal pay thing? I don't know if anybody saw the Super Bowl ad that Audi ran. Did anybody see that?
Yeah, there's actually no women CEOs at Audi, I think.
There's no women on the board. But my favorite part, so they had tweeted something about their ad and equal pay and something, and someone tweeted back at them saying, oh, well, it's illegal to pay women less. You do this at your in your company. And their tweet back, we'll have to put in the links up, because they totally self-refuted their whole claim. And basically they responded back, well, when you factor in all the different things that women and men do in our company, they make the same. And so they kind of just proved the whole point that so many different market factors play into it. And they completely took apart their own argument, which was kind of...
Gina, you didn't get a chance to answer the initial question, so I want to give you a...
Yeah, actually, I don't think I've ever really, people have expected something based on my gender in terms of my politics. I am coming from a different perspective, I think, than everyone here, which is that I've always been a feminist ever since I, learned what it meant. I've never questioned that. I've been through many different iterations of feminism, but I've always considered myself a feminist. And all of my other identities kind of stem from that in terms of politics and economics and etc. What I do find is that I would consider myself a libertarian, but in many ways I'm pretty politically homeless. I'm very socially liberal in comparison to a lot of the libertarians I spend time with. But I am also very economically conservative. I am very pro-capitalism. I'm very pro-small government. And I think where a lot of misconceptions come is if I talk to my liberal friends about social issues, they also expect me to be liberal in other issues as well, and vice versa in terms of libertarianism. However, I think the libertarians are very accepting of my liberal social positions. That's what I like about libertarians, they're great.
As the former SFL president, I can say we are. It's very good to have Gina. She's quite the catch.
SFL in general, I think you guys are such an accommodating group that you can have everybody from conservatives to even moderates to centrists to literal anarchists at your meeting.
Oh yes. Or even if a confused socialist wanders in, we'll set them straight.
I think my favorite, and I'll plug the podcast with the Libertarians below, butthurt ANCAP is my favorite phrase from the Libertarians.
And butthurt ANCAPs are also welcome.
When there's roads.
Oh, God.
And Ben and Jordan both talked about women in STEM, so I'd like to also touch on that, which is...
absolutely, yeah.
So I don't know the exact numbers in terms of women in STEM fields, but I think it's very interesting that like social sciences such as psychology are not considered in STEM, and psychology is very female dominated. Some of the most important research and papers that I've read are written by women and conducted by women, and I think it's interesting that the feminist movement doesn't tend to acknowledge that. And I think it says something about they don't want to look at the accomplishments in these other fields, and I think that's a problem.
And I want to ask Jordan a quick question. What was the makeup of an average engineering class in college with regard to gender?
So I was mechanical engineering, which skews more male. To kind of give you an idea, actually, there are quite a good deal of women in engineering in general. Bioengineering is really big, chemical engineering. If you go into those departments, I would say they're probably about 50-50 now, at least at Pitt. Mechanical is obviously one of those more male-dominated fields, and for a class of, say, 80 people, it was probably about 10 to 1 guys by the end of college.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very male-dominated. To give you an idea, now there are, I think, about 11 people in my engineering group, and I'm one of 2 girls.
And so what do each of you, as women in STEM, how do you think more women can get involved in STEM from an earlier age?
Personally, I mean, it might be my personal upbringing and experience. I've never felt excluded from STEM based on my gender. I originally wanted to be a psychology major. I came to Pitt as a neuroscience major because I felt pressured to actually be in STEM because I'm a woman. And I felt like I wanted to prove something because I was told there's all these stereotypes against women in STEM fields. But I realized that wasn't for me, and it had nothing to do with my gender or feeling pushed down by men or anything of that sort. I just have more interest in psychology and more of a softer science than a natural science, and I think that's fine. I actually felt bad when I dropped the major because of the reasons I went into it, but I think actually women who go into other fields can be pushed to the side by feminist groups because there's so much focus on women in STEM. And I think there is a tendency for at least people who are assigned female at birth to go into different fields than STEM. I don't think it's purely a social factor. It might be, I don't know. But from my experience, I haven't felt pressure to not be in STEM, I guess.
And Jordan?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I've never, I was a little bit pressured to go into it. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do for a while. But like I said earlier, there's so much outreach now to younger girls, but at the same time, there is kind of this pressure now, I think, where, so many people are, oh, we need women in STEM. And I think that it's kind of counterintuitive to the pro-choice kind of message of the feminist movement, because so many times I think, I do think it is somewhat biological too, as far as women and men are different, naturally different, and that's a good thing, I believe. I truly think that we need the genders to complement each other. I think they do. And that's not to say that women can't be in male fields. Obviously, I'm a woman in a male field. And that's not to say that men can't go into fields that are typically more female-dominated. But I do think there are certain aspects of fields that naturally, draw on the typical natural ability of men and women. And like I said, there's obviously a lot of overlap. But I do think that is part of the reason. So I don't think just because we see a disparity that's necessarily a problem. Obviously, we don't want it to be the result of us not being welcoming to women in STEM, but I never once felt unwelcome. In fact, they're kind of, because they're so wanting to bring up like that ratio and say they have more women in them, they're kind of, they kind of go out of their way to make you feel welcome. So I don't really think it's a problem.
Interesting. And Marlo, have you felt in journalism, is there any disparity between men and women, whether in training or in practice?
I haven't been, I've been working mostly in conservative journalism, which is, I mean, it is journalism, but it's much, much different.
Yeah.
It's much more, you know, we don't really classify each other by our genders. We just go strictly by the book. You're qualified or you're not qualified when it comes to hiring practices. My experience with the Pitt News, however, I remember whenever I actually was asked this question by someone conducting interviews with us because I was an opinions editor, and they were asking, do you see any like differences in how, you know, women and men are treated within journalism? And I said, not really, honestly. Like, women, I feel like they conduct themselves the same way. They contribute the same things, but the things they write about are much different. Women tend to write about social issues and, you know, cultural issues, while men tend to write about economics, and they tend to write about more, you know, objective, less, you know, culturally centered topics. But other than that, in journalism, I really have not sensed any, you know, any bias in practice and hiring. If anything, I feel like they're really trying to push for more women in, you know, editor positions, especially at Pitt News. Yeah.
And I know one of the pieces you published for us was about the Women's March, and I plan on plugging that in the link dump. Can you talk about the piece a little bit, because I think it was so important for us to publish.
Yeah, so I wasn't at the Women's March, but I read a lot about it. I was there for the inauguration the day before, but the things I heard about it were really, really saddening to me. Not just because of the things that some of the people had been saying that were, you know, center stage at the march, who were, you know, brought to speak to the protesters, but just the kind of environment that these women brought with them was, I know there was animosity. It was somewhat, not violent, but it was definitely not a peaceful environment to be in. I would have probably felt uncomfortable and quite alienated had I gone. And basically my piece was about my experience the week after when I went down for the pro-life march, which I am honestly, and you know, I will tell you this, it was the most feminist environment I've ever been in. There was actually, one of the speakers was a New York Times best-selling author, and I think he has a talk show, and he was outrightly saying, you know what, like, Madonna may say she wants to blow up the White House, but I would never say that about Madonna. And just for those of you who didn't hear, Madonna said she sometimes contemplated blowing up Donald Trump, you know, his house, I guess now the White House. And he said, not only have I never thought about blowing up your house, but I love you, Madonna, because you know, the Lord, you know, conducts me to say that, or to feel that I love my enemies. And he said, if you've had an abortion and you're a woman, we still love you. You know, we still care about you. We care about everyone here. We care about everyone who's a human being. And I think that's incredibly feminist. I think that's what every feminist should hold in her or his heart, is that, you know, it should be something that is accepting and inclusive. I hate that they use the term inclusive when they're not willing to live by that term. And that the pro-life march, I would say, was tenfold. It was so much more inclusive than I imagined the Women's March was, and that's I think anyone who is in either environment would say the same.
And does anybody else want to get a point in on the Women's March?
Well, one of my biggest problems with it is that they're kind of running into the trap of chasing ghosts. You know, I saw a lot of my friends on Facebook were there and posting, you know, different signs and different posts about it. And the reason I think this is a situation of chasing ghosts is here in Washington, and you're marching against the federal government, or in some cases local marches against state governments, which makes a little bit more sense. But so often, you know, if you're protesting against the federal government and you know, you're wanting to implement legislation, nobody actually seemed to have a cohesive idea of what the march was about. And even the organizers, they kind of operate in this world of buzzwords, where it was, you know, women's rights, which, okay, women's rights, we can all agree, I hope we can all agree, are a great thing to support. But then when you start to get down and say, okay, well, which rights, and specifically, you know, what are you asking the people you're protesting against to do? Because, you know, so many people said, well, you know, they're they're just kind of throwing like a hissy fit after Trump won, they're just kind of whining, and it's, I didn't want to accuse people of that, but at the same time, it's like when you keep asking, well, what specifically are you marching for, and no one's really giving a clear answer, I think it kind of becomes somewhat acceptable to make those accusations about them, because it didn't seem like, even when they threw out, reproductive justice, well, what you're asking actually legislative-wise, you're asking people to mandate things with their tax dollars, you're asking to put more regulations on businesses, and I think just kind of, they operate in this world of buzzwords where we say, we're marching for one thing, and then if you say you don't agree with the march, and they conflate that as being against women's rights, and that's kind of where it gets difficult.
No, I think those are good points. So my question was, to branch off Marlo, because I think it was a good point about not being inclusive enough. And so one of the things I put for the transcript for today was that I believe that Milo Yiannopoulos, because we talk about him all the time, he preys on a feeling that young men feel targeted simply for being male. Do you think that exists? Because I think Milo draws power from that so many young men feel disassociated because I think they're being told, because they're male, that they have a prejudice or that they feel a certain way. I don't think any of us believe that all feminists believe this. I think just like as there is the alt-right, I think there's a very, very, very small percentage of people who do espouse this beliefs.
Yeah, definitely.
And I want everybody to contribute.
I think the issue is that men feel this way in the first place, that they feel like feminists are targeting them and that they hate them. That's a serious issue that men even feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
It means that feminists need to do some reflecting and make sure that men know that this is a movement of inclusion and equality, and if men sincerely feel, which they do, like you said, Milo does prey on young men who feel that feminism is indeed cancerous. If they sincerely feel that way, that's an issue, and I stand by those men because I want to teach them. I genuinely want to reach out to them and say, listen, I know that a lot of feminists have made you feel like, you are hated, like you are, by virtue of being born, that you are a pig, that you are, just a woman-hating, misogynist. I want to reach out to them and say, well, I consider myself a feminist, and I don't feel that way. I think that I want to foster an environment where men feel included in this movement, if only to treat women with, to be chivalrous or to be, just generally respectful of a fellow human being. So I think that that's an issue that I don't like how Milo went about it, but I think that it's important that women recognize, especially feminists, recognize that men generally feel very ostracized by it.
I think there's a lot to unpack there. I understand why men feel like they're being attacked. There's a few different things to talk about. One is that because women are becoming more equal, they are rising to the level of men, but that can feel like men are losing equality because they're so used to being above women socially. And then there's also the thing, a lot of feminists say they hate men. It happens all the time. And I think what men need to realize when women are saying they hate men is that a lot of times what that means is they hate the patriarchal system. It's not usually referring to individual men. So I think men need to not take it so personally, but at the same time, I understand that they do, and I don't like that kind of rhetoric. I don't like it. I don't think that's something that we should be saying. But I think there needs to be a lot of self-reflection from both sides. Men need to analyze their implicit biases. Everyone has them. Most men probably are sexist in some ways that they don't realize, and that's okay if you think about it and try to fix it. It's not, I don't think it's bad to be implicitly sexist or racist or what have you if you try to fix it, because it's just natural. It's just the way humans are. But at the same time, I think women and feminists also need to think about how to reach out to people who aren't in the movement. I understand being angry. A lot of times I get angry, especially like when there's people just trolling on the internet. It's frustrating, but a lot of times people say things and they don't realize the kind of weight that it can carry, and just screaming at them is not going to fix it, because then they're just going to become antagonized when they don't even realize they were doing anything wrong in the first place. Now, if you try to teach them and they're still like mean about it, then maybe you can scream at them. But like, at least try it first. That's what I'm saying.
And I use Milo as the example because, I mean, he's somebody who says feminism is cancer and espouses, I mean, just ridiculous statements at his speeches. And he gets a room full of people to cheer, and he gets thousands upon thousands of views on YouTube doing it. And I think he represents that the young men do feel angry about it. But I think you guys made fantastic points about how they can be better included within it. And it just, Ben and I, from being males in college, do you believe that there is a feminist perspective that does hate men, that does feel that way, and you can understand where like the Miloites have come from?
Yeah, I think I think I would agree with everyone here. There is definitely a fringe of feminists that hate men. Mm-hmm. That being said, I don't think that's the majority of feminists by far.
Absolutely.
And I think, but yeah, so that is my opinion on that situation. Like, I think it exists, but it's not serious. It's not a serious contender. I think people see that minority and they characterize everything. It's sort of like the issue Republicans have. They see, like, not all Republicans are racist, but like if you have someone like David Duke, who's like basically a Republican name only, they're like, well, look, he's a racist Republican. So, but like that's like the same logic there.
And I said this last week. We have to be so careful with our language and how we're describing things for exactly that reason. And so I do want to ask, what role do you think men have in this movement? And that's for everybody.
I think definitely being, advocates for the treatment of, the equal treatment of women. I think the biggest issue that faces women, the reason why, I'll get into this. In terms of American society, I think implicit bias can be an issue. I definitely think, I haven't seen it much on college campuses in terms of in the classroom, but of course things like sexual harassment to whatever extent you believe rape culture exists, it still is an issue, and many women, actually it's mostly women who are targets of and who are victim survivors of sexual assault. So I think definitely making sure that there are consequences and life-altering consequences for these egregious acts, just as for anyone who's a victim of these heinous acts. I think there should be consequences, and I do think that the system has been kind of soft on them. But I definitely think that we need to extend the I think right now the goals for feminists have been, so like Jordan said, they've been kind of chasing ghosts at this point. The reason why I stick with feminism, the reason why I refuse to say that I am not a feminist, even though women keep trying to tell me that I'm not because I voted for whoever, or I am a conservative, or I'm pro-life, is because, in the Middle East and in different parts of the world, women are still being killed for dishonoring their fathers. Women are still having acid thrown in their faces for doing what they wish. Women are still having to, they can't even touch the steering wheel of a car in Saudi Arabia because women cannot drive. These things still happen. And I think women have really pushed that to the side in the U.S., and they choose not to look at that. Whether they choose not to look at that is, your guess is as good as mine, but for whatever reason, that has not been something that they are choosing to, become advocates for alongside these very brave women in the Middle East who literally risk their lives. If women think they're risking their lives here, appearing at a women's march or doing whatever, these women literally are at the, their fathers could be the ones that kill them. Their brothers could be the ones that kill them. It isn't just the government. It isn't just the police in these situations. So I think that, we as the most powerful country in the United States, or as in the world, with these women who constantly make headlines for, appearing at marches, for doing, inspiring legislation, things like that. I think that men need to come alongside women to fight, for these women overseas who are, in the year 2017, who continue to fear for their lives for things that we, as women, as men, are able to do on a daily basis without, fear of harm.
Yeah, and to go off of, I'll try to bring this back to men at the end. To go off of what Marlo was saying about women in the Middle East, a lot of time the backlash to those arguments are kind of, well, just because they have it bad doesn't mean that we shouldn't, fight for rights here, which is true, except for, a lot of the times, the rights for those in the Middle East aren't really recognized at all. And in fact, one of my huge issues with the Women's March was that Linda Sarsour, the co-founder of the march, she's a Palestinian activist, but she had made a couple tweets about Saudi Arabia, which just absolutely blew my mind. The one was, and I have it up here, this 10 weeks of paid maternity leave in Saudi Arabia. Yes, paid, and you're worrying about women driving. Puts us to shame. And I mean, of course, they can only get paid maternity leave after they get their husband's permission to go to work, but she conveniently, left that out. And then she went on to tweet, FYI, mandated head covering for Muslim women in Saudi Arabia is the least of their worries. Stop making it the issue. It's not. So it's one thing to say that, we should worry about both, but so many times with these, these aren't these fringe feminists. Obviously, there are some that say crazy things that shouldn't be taken seriously, but this is one of the leaders of the march, just outright excusing, egregious rights violations in the Middle East. And so when you see that, and then I find it so hard to take their movement seriously when you're so willing to just sweep, these blatant violations just under the rug.
Well, I guess my answer to the question, what role do I see for men? I want there to be an environment where, to reference my earlier story, where men are able to use the label comfortably, where they don't have to think about the label and all that it implies.
Absolutely. I think that goes for many women as well. I think that even, I'm still trying to kind of proselytize Jordan, but who knows what'll happen. But even myself, I would love if there was an environment for even women like myself to use that label comfortably, yeah.
I mean, I think I would say, I don't know, I would assume Andrew would agree, but I mean, men are willing to help if, women are seeing any issues, whether it's in the workplace, in government or anything like that. We're eager to help you achieving equality.
Yeah, because I think we're both, equality obviously entails that we're both in this and we both want to achieve it, yeah. Gina, do you have anything?
I think that the label of feminist is both personal and social. I think it's something that you can give to yourself, and I think it all comes from the same ideology of equality of genders, but I don't think everyone has to reach the same conclusion about how to reach that equality, which I think is the problem in the feminist movement right now. There is a dominant idea about how to reach the equality, and if you don't agree with that, then you don't want equality, but that's not the case.
Yeah, and I think it just kind of like to end with some maybe advice for the feminist movement as far as if they want to draw more women into their field. There's kind of two things that I would recommend. The one is to fix their inability to take criticism. Remember on Facebook, someone had written something about not being a feminist, and it was fairly well written, and she had many legitimate criticisms. And I just remember people commenting back, and these people are very normal, well-educated, nice people, but they instantly went to, this person has internalized misogyny, they're speaking from a place of privilege, why does she hate herself and she's not a feminist? But it totally ignored any of the actual substance of this person's argument, and it instantly went on the attack as if we are, as the feminist movement, are nothing wrong. So I think on the one hand, they should definitely be more willing to hear out different people, and the other one is to really honestly just change kind of their mission statement. I don't want to go on for too long, so we can maybe just throw this in the link dump, but now the National Organization for Women, if you read through their whole mission statement, it's like a whole paragraph. But it goes so far off of the definition of just equality for women. And this is like the main women's organization in the United States. And it goes into all this intersectionality, which a lot of it is great things, but it has nothing to do with that definition of feminism. And it, instantly goes to abortion rights, which, half of the women in the United States don't even agree with. So it's very specific to, all these things, but then they instantly go back to that same definition. So I think if they can fix things, I think a lot of more women would be attracted to the label.
And can you send me that link so I can plug it below?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So I promised, we're getting to the point of running out of time, but I promised that I would ask the Trump question, which is, given Trump's history with women, the way that he reported, the video 11 years ago, as we said, what is your impression of Donald Trump? What was your impression of him during the campaign?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump is a misogynist. I don't support him at all. I didn't vote for him. However, I think that it's a problem that he's in power, but I think the problem is that the government's too big. So it shouldn't be a problem that he's in power because the government should be smaller.
I don't think he hates women. I think he has done and said some very sexist things, which I obviously disapprove of. But I don't think that the right way about, how do I put this? I don't hate Donald Trump. I think that he should learn from his mistakes and the backlash it caused and know that his actions were morally reprehensible and that they are not condoned in American society, in contemporary American society. And I think that I don't hate the guy. I honestly felt more alienated by Hillary Clinton than I did by him. And if you want to call me a self-hating woman for that, please go ahead. I've heard it many times. But I definitely think that, Hillary Clinton, by virtue of, if we're going to do this comparison, which I know it's been done a million times, the way that she went about trying to gain respect from women to vote for her by basically telling them, you have no choice, or you have to vote for me because I'm a woman, I think that's incredibly insulting in and of itself, and it personally insults my intellectual capabilities, so I guess that's my spiel on Donald Trump.
And then I'll interject, my own personal, I was personally disturbed by the locker room talk comment. I've played a lot of sports. I've never once heard anything like that mentioned at all. And I think it is wrong of him to sort of assume that it's just normal male behavior that's discussed and that we use that kind of terminology and language.
Absolutely,
Yeah, that's insulting to both men and women, I think, to say that that is the way that men behave. I believe that men are able to behave better than that, and men who behave that way don't, at least when they're behaving that way, they're certainly not respecting women. And I don't think it should be passed off as the norm. I don't think it is. In my experience with men, I don't find that it is. I haven't been in a male locker room though, so.
And I want to give Jordan and Ben a chance to answer the Trump question as well.
I thought it was pretty disgusting what he said. I think we also don't want to let Billy Bush off the hook either.
Jeb's cousin. That
Yeah.
is sad.
That is sad. Jeb needs to talk to him about that. But no, I mean, jokes aside though, it shouldn't be said in any circumstance, even in a locker room. It was completely inappropriate what was said. That being said though, I still think there was greater issues that disqualified supporting Trump in my opinion, such as immigration and his kind of weird relationship with Russia, and now the Sessions pick, which I don't like, but it was inappropriate.
And before I get to Jordan, I think what's funny is he was a 59-year-old man at that point
Yeah.
in time, and to act like he was a juvenile, it's so ridiculous. But Jordan, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with Ben. We probably did vote for him for a little bit of different reasons, but yeah, I didn't vote for Trump, but and obviously I was very bothered by those comments, but that didn't factor into my decision not to vote. Mine was mostly based on his, he had said some questionable things about possibly supporting a single-payer healthcare plan. He's been kind of iffy on gun rights in Israel and things like that that are very important issues to me. So I didn't vote for Trump, but I think, I will say this though, after he's been elected, he's done a lot of things I disagree with. And I'm glad that I made the decision not to vote for him. However, I think I find myself defending him so much more now just based on the liberal reaction. And as to bring it back to feminism, I think what the media needs to be careful, and people in general, is classifying any attack on a specific woman as a sign of sexism. I remember particularly there was a video that was being shared all over Facebook, and it was titled something like "Instances of Sexism in Mainstream Media," and it was this video compilation, and it must have gone on for 6 minutes. There might have been 2 clips in there that were legitimately sexist instances, but so many of them were just normal, what you would see on the news every day when everybody's arguing all the time. I mean, that's all cable news is now. And it would be the same way 2 guys would argue, but if it involved a woman, that was labeled as sexist. And so I think we need to be careful a little bit about just saying that anytime, you disagree with someone, that's sexist, because I think we've kind of fallen into that trap a little bit in the mainstream media.
Great. And just to wrap up the discussion, I want to do some fun questions as well. Once in the podcast, Marlo called me a feminist icon.
Fair.
So I want to ask the question, who is your feminist icon to everyone? For me, it's Ivanka Trump.
Fair.
Amy Murphy of Life Matters Journal. Look it up. It's a pro-life feminist organization, and she's great.
Kellyanne Conway and Andrew.
Harriet, I would go with John Stuart Mill's wife, Harriet Taylor Mill, who advised John Stuart Mill on a lot of things when it came to political rank. John Stuart Mill is a phenomenal political theorist, and Harriet played a major role in, and they have a beautiful romantic story together.
Aww.
Jordan?
Mine is my mom, because she had a college degree, she had a job, she chose of her own volition to be a stay-at-home mom, which I think is the most empowering field, and she raised me to be a successful woman, and I hope I'm half the woman that she is. So.
That's beautiful.
All right, favorite female political figure. Mine is Nikki Haley.
I gotta go with Margaret Thatcher. The great quote, "The problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money."
I think I'm going to have to agree with Ben on this one.
Mia Love.
Oh, great, yeah. Jordan?
Oh, well, I had Margaret Thatcher as mine, so...
That's fair. And who's
And
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry, there's the overlap.
my backup if someone said it was Nikki Haley, so I'm out of luck.
And who is a role model for young men to look up to? Because I remember there was a primary debate in New Hampshire where they asked, "Is Donald Trump a role model for your children?" And they couldn't give a straight answer. So.
I guess I'll start this one. Again, I mentioned him in the beginning of the podcast, but I think Ben Sasse right now, if you're looking for someone in politics, and I would be very wary of looking up to a politician. But if you're specifically looking for someone in politics, I think he has that perfect balance of understanding that politics shouldn't consume your life. And I will just plug a really quick speech of his. We'll throw it in the link dump. But he had given a speech at the Federalist Society and kind of about opposing your own party when they're in power from government overreach, and very well spoken.
I'm honestly between Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. I think Ted Cruz, even in the healthcare debate between Bernie Sanders, just the way he talks about his daughters and his wife is very endearing, and I think he's a really good family man. He has some really great values. I would definitely want my children to look up to him, and I definitely, consider him a role model in that respect. And I think Rand Paul as well. He has his own. What's it called? What do they call it? An eye doctor. He's an eye doctor.
Ophthalmologist.
Ophthalmologist. That's right. Yeah, he for free. Sometimes he generally cares about his community. He will give them free eye exams. I think he's a great role model as well.
I probably would go with George Washington. I think he's a good role model. He is honest, even though the cherry tree is a myth, but still a good guy, and was someone who was very leery about power, and I think was also really a responsible citizen and was very brave.
Yeah, I had a hard time with this question. Sorry, Jordan. I kind of like what Marlo said about Rand Paul. I think that Marco Rubio is also a pretty good role model for men. That's all I have to say about that.
And every week I've said that I voted for Kasich, so this is the 5th week in a row, and I'm plugging John Kasich here. But Jordan, I know you had a point to make, so go right ahead.
Oh no, it's not important. I was just going to say I was going to joke that I'm changing my answer to Calvin Coolidge because
True.
he's the only person I have a framed picture of in my apartment. So.
Fair. I want to say thank you to everyone for being on today. I'm super happy everyone was able to make it, whether that's through Skype or in person. I want to remind the audience to please like, share, and subscribe on all forms of social media. It goes a long way to helping us be more successful. And if you're willing, please support us on Patreon. We plan on releasing a special episode soon, so we'll keep you guys in the loop. And a question I ask every week, what did you learn on the Mavericast today?
Well, I would say that I learned that it's possible to do the Mavericast by podcast. Not by podcast, by Skype.
Fair.
Feminism is for everyone.
Feminism can be cancer, but not all the time.
Jordan?
I like Dana's point about women in psychology. I thought that was interesting.
Great. Thank you guys again for being on. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.